The second and third purpose involves the offerings, which is what we're going to talk about now. The 5 offerings. There are 5 offerings. There's the burnt offering, the meat or meal offering, that's a grain offering, peace offering, the sin offering, and the trespass offering. Those are the 5 offerings. Okay, now there's some specific things we need to know about these before we go any further. First, the meal and the peace offering were voluntary. You didn't have to do it. No one's going to make you do it. It's completely voluntary. Nobody had to do it unless they chose to. The sin and the trespass offering are compulsory. Someone is going to force you to do that. It's mandatory. There's no way around it. The burnt offering can kind of be both. The burnt offering and the sin offering and trespass offering are for atonement. But the meal and the peace offering are not for atonement. Nowhere in the scripture will it ever say the peace offering or the meal offering is for atonement. I've looked and looked and looked and I've never found a verse that says that. But the other ones clearly says that. Keep that in your mind as we continue on. Okay, the first one, it's food regulation. That's the peace offering. It's our butcher statute. That's how we butcher meat. That's how we get meat. The Hebrews were not allowed to eat of their animals unless brought to the tabernacle. So you had to bring your animals to the tabernacle. They were going to regulate the meat. They were required to offer meat so the Levites could have their portion. This is their tithe. This is their portion. They get to eat. They don't get to go raise animals because they're doing the civil service. They're working in the tabernacle. This ensured the proper killing of an animal. The fat was trimmed and the blood drained. You can see clearly Leviticus 3 is the peace offering statute. The very last verse of that chapter says, "It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings that ye eat neither fat nor blood." The whole point is that we eat neither fat nor blood. It was food regulation for our meat. The International Standard Bible Encyclopedia says the same thing. The feast before God on the mount, the peace offerings provided the food. The peace offerings were for food. When you wanted to eat meat, you did a peace offering. It was just that simple. We look at it as a religious thing now, and we don't understand that anymore.
We shouldn't, because he was against religion.
He was. I believe our Messiah was so against religion, and it just distorts the scripture. And we need to see it by God's intent. That's what the spirit of the law means. In the New Testament, we had the shambles, remember? Paul said, "Whatsoever is sold in the shambles, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake." Shambles is a butcher stall, a meat market, or a provision shop. This is where the peace offering ultimately went. Look what he said earlier. What's he talking about? A couple chapters. "As concerning, therefore, the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice to idols." You mean the things sacrificed to idols went to the meat market to be sold, right? This is a butcher statute. We just don't recognize the words. We know that an idol is nothing in the world and that there is none other God but one. So we know there's no other God. So eating meat offered to nobody is not a big deal. But there is one part that's a little different. What about when it's polluted? In Acts they said don't eat anything polluted of idols. Polluted means to soil, defile, or pollution. We can eat things offered in sacrifice to idols, but not polluted in sacrifice to idols. Well, how do you pollute something in sacrifice? Well, if you violate one of the dietary laws. The whole purpose to the peace offering is that we eat neither fat nor blood. So if you eat strangled meat, some countries strangle their meat. If I went to their country and I knew that, that's keeping all the blood inside, and now you're eating all the blood. I'm not going to name the countries, but we live right next to one. Not trimming off the fat. Some countries don't do that. And America's kind of a hybrid on this. We allow by law 30% fat in our meat. That's way too much. When Rochelle and I buy meat, we try to buy 90% lean or more. And so we can still choose to follow this statute. Slaughtering of unclean animals is obviously one of those. So we can eat in any temple, a pagan temple, as long as they're doing the peace offering correctly. If they're not, I would avoid eating it. So if we're traveling to a different temple or a different country, I haven't even just defined what I believe a temple is, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the peace offering. It provided the meat for the meat market. It could be sold for 2 days. The third day it was spoiled. Well, that's true. If you cook your meat today and tomorrow, you're okay to eat it. If it's raw, you can't. But remember, the tabernacle cooked it. They didn't have refrigeration. The third day it's spoiled, you throw it out, which is exactly what the scripture says. We see it as a religious thing, and it's not a religious thing. It's a health thing. Okay, food regulation. The peace offering has 17 statutes. So I'm going to try and go quick, but there's a few things I want to point out. These are the 17 things of the peace offering that I found. And I totally admit, I'm changing this all the time. There's probably stuff I missed and stuff it's a work in progress. Just please understand that. The priest received the breast as a wave offering. So when you do a peace offering, the priest gets his portion. That's a payment. The priest receives the right shoulder as a heave offering. That's another payment. He's doing a service. He's getting paid. We'll understand the difference between America now and God's system. They dealt in property. We deal in fiat currency. If you deal in fiat currency, you have no idea what it's like to deal in property. Unless you like to trade or something. It's just a different system. So we don't see it because it's not something we're used to. The offering can be a bull, a sheep, or a goat. These are all 3 clean animals domesticated that you would raise yourself. Later in the scripture it mentions going hunting and how you would handle that as well. Because you wouldn't really bring a deer, because no one raises deer. They're wild animals. They don't domesticate as comfortably as these other animals do. The offerer shall place his hands on the head of the offering. We get real religious about that, but if you've ever slaughtered an animal, you got to grab it by the horns sturdy and then slit its throat and hold it firmly. That's all this is talking about. I don't think there's anything more to it than that. The offerer shall kill the animal at the door of the tabernacle. Bleed it out. All the fat, kidneys, liver, and the rump are to be burned. That's unedible and unusable for us. So we don't use it, so we burn it. The priest shall burn the offering. Okay, now the priest is going to cook the offering. And then the priest shall sprinkle the blood around the brazen altar. Blood's toxic. So as you kill out the animal, you spill it in a bowl. Now you dump it around the altar. Okay, there was many of the pictures, it wasn't in the one I showed up, but many of the pictures have rocks and some place to dump. Just such a thing. It's a drainage into the dirt, which is exactly what God told us to do when we're out hunting, to drain it into the dirt. 9, the peace offering is for food regulation. I've already gone over that one. May eat on the first or the second day. But the third day, you need to burn it and get rid of it. We know why. I just mentioned that earlier. The spirit of the peace offering is that we eat food correctly. You don't want to eat meat after the second day. Question. What's that? That's what I was just getting at. You're jumping right ahead of me. Do refrigerators meet this statute? I think they do. We have goat meat that we butchered over a year ago still in our freezer. And I don't feel guilty about eating it. It's perfectly healthy to eat. Because the intent of this law is that we eat neither fat nor blood. That we eat healthy meat. So if we have refrigerators now and they didn't, of course we can eat it on the 365th day. As long as it's been frozen. But if our refrigerator went out, which has happened at the church before, we throw it all out. Right? It's happened twice since I've been here. With the refrigerator, you don't eat that meat. 12, it can be for Thanksgiving. Josephus said the thank offerings were designed for feasting those that sacrifice. It's a feast. It's a party. If for Thanksgiving, it must be unleavened cakes or wafers. Josephus also said the meat offerings are consumed together with the animals that are sacrificed. Okay, on a Thanksgiving, on a feast, on a celebration. This is a multi-course meal. Think about their culture. They would eat bread and maybe some meat. But if you're throwing a party, you're going to do the whole thing. We're spoiled today. We have multi-course meals all the time. They didn't. So when you're doing a thank offering or a Thanksgiving offering, this is you're celebrating something. If for Thanksgiving, it must be eaten the first day. Well, that makes sense. When you're going to throw a party, aren't you going to have the freshest food? You're not going to bring leftovers, right? The Thanksgiving meal is very simple in my mind. This could be for a party, a celebration, a wedding, etc. Josephus explains all that. Is a multi-course meal. And it must be eaten the first day because you are to always provide the best food in celebration. We just naturally do that, I think. If everyone's coming over, we're going to have good food. I'm not going to serve bad food. It can be done to fulfill a vow, a contract, a vow. A vow offering can be eaten the first or the second day. Now think about how a vow offering might be done today. A vow or contract offering. I think we would call this a business meal today. If you are contracting with someone, you should decide over the course of a meal. Anytime you're going to do a contract and you sit down and eat with somebody, you're going to know that person and gain their trust. It's going to be a lot harder to break that contract than if you didn't do that. And we still have a resemblance of that today. Most businessmen I know, if they're successful, when they're doing a big, now I'm not talking about small deals. I'm talking about a big deal. That's a lot of money, a lot invested. You're going to sit down and eat with them with a meal. That's what the vow offerings were for. Finally, excommunication is the penalty for breaking the peace offering. Excommunicate, that's a hard word today. It says if you bring it not unto the door of the tabernacle. I don't think this means if you didn't go to the tabernacle. Like so many times, whoa, we don't have a tabernacle, we can't do this. I don't think that's true. I never believe that when someone says that. This phrase means under the authority of the tabernacle. Okay? It is estimated that there were 2.5 million Israelites in the Exodus. This building here that we're in is way bigger than the tabernacle. How can 2.5 million people work with the tabernacle? It's impossible. The tabernacle alone could not serve all of Israel. Moses had already divided the duties of the tabernacle in Exodus 18. He said, make rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10. They're going to serve the people. And where did they go? The gates of the city contained the lower courts. All over the cities, in several cities spread out, there were many tabernacles or lower court systems where you could take care of that. You wouldn't have to go to this one tabernacle, and it spread. Like I said, God's plan was Israel's going to grow. So you were excommunicated if you prepared your meat on a pagan altar or in a pagan manner. But it's the pagan manner, it's the incorrect way that I think is the spirit of this law, that we eat neither fat nor blood. And again, it is the food for the offering that we eat neither fat nor blood. That's the purpose of the peace offering. The meal offering is the same thing. It was to inspect grains. Now this one's a little harder to prove, but bear with me on this. The Hebrews were not allowed to eat of their crops until they made an offering. Hebrews were not allowed to eat of their fruit until the 4th year. Hebrews were not allowed to eat genetically modified plants from Leviticus 19:19 and Deuteronomy 22:9. Hebrews were required to offer grain and fruit so the Levites could have their portion. The main reason is so the Levites have their portion. So if you were a farmer, you'd bring all your crops to the tabernacle to pay for the priests. This is what led to the kosher laws today. Now, if you look at how the Jews look at the kosher laws, it comes from the word kasher. It means fit, acceptable, to be straight or right. The Jews use this term, they even have a certificate for it, to determine what is acceptable food. Kashrut is a term used throughout the oral law to describe the priest's duties to regulate food. That's where the rabbis got this idea from. That's why they have such a strict regulation of kosher food. Since Hebrews were required to bring of the first of their crops, the Levites could inspect if the food were acceptable. I believe that's why they have to put it in their hand. I'm going to show you why in a minute. Like I said, this is a little speculative, but I think it matches the peace offering. There are 9 statutes. Shall be a fine flour with oil and frankincense. The priest shall take a handful and burn it on the altar. That's what I was talking about. This, I think, is an inspection process. I think we'll see that in just a minute. The priest receives the remainder of the offering. So he gets his portion, just like the scripture said. It can be cakes of fine flour with oil. It can be baked in an oven or a pan. If cooked, it shall be cut in pieces. Cannot contain leaven or honey. I think that's critical. This is food regulation. Cannot contain yeast or honey. Yeast alters flour. It does. It just alters flour. If you're going to test it and check it, you don't want yeast in it. Honey feeds the yeast.
But they didn't have yeast like we have, wasn't it? Wild?
Well, it was wild yeast, which is why we put yeast into it. My wife bakes bread and she throws yeast into it. Normally they'd have to let it sit and build and grow. So it would be a lot easier. Well, it's probably a lot easier now, but you would have a set aside piece that you would throw in the lump to get it to start fermenting, basically, I guess.
So what they're talking about is making this without that piece they throw in.
Yes, just the dough made right away. First fruits shall be green ears of corn mixed with oil and frankincense. Okay, the meal offering. Provided food for the priests. It was called the covenant of salt. That's what that covenant is to provide food for the priests. It could not be eaten until the first fruits were offered. And this was a food inspection process. The priest would inspect a handful before it could be used publicly. Look what we do in America today. This is our wheat and flour testing methods, a guide to understanding wheat and flour quality version 2. Look how similar this is. The grade determining factors are test weight, heat damage. I wonder if that's why it was cooked. And total damaged kernels. The damaged kernels is a grade determining factor and is composed of 2 categories, heat damage and total damage. The level of enzyme activity measured by the falling number, I'm not going to try and explain what the falling number, because that's kind of irrelevant here, but there's a falling number test that affects the product quality. Yeast in bread dough, for example, requires sugars or honey to develop properly and therefore needs some level of enzyme activity in the dough. If the falling number is too high, enzymes can be added to the flour in various ways to compensate. But if the falling number is too low, you cannot remove the enzymes. You can't get the yeast out of bread. Okay? We do a very similar process today in America. The sample is mixed and washed with a 2% salt solution. I thought that was interesting too. The connections were just amazing how we do this in America in a similar way. I don't know if we follow all the statutes. It's something I want to start looking into soon. But it just blew me away when I stumbled across this. So I think the food regulation are the peace offering and the meal offering. So we have a hospital, that's the first reason. Food regulation is the second. Perhaps this is why the priests were required to wash before entering the tabernacle. Maybe for the same reason this guy does. Don't you want your doctor to wash? What about the guy that prepares your food? That's probably what the labor was for. You'd wash before you deal with all these things.